On a sweltering August afternoon in 1953, a 37-year-old American named Kermit Roosevelt sat in the basement of the United States Embassy in Tehran. On the desk in front of him, roughly $1 million in cash. His mission, approved personally by President Dwight Eisenhower, was simple: overthrow the elected government of Iran in 4 days and restore a weakened king to absolute power. He succeeded, and in doing so, he planted the seed of every war America would fight in the Middle East for the next 70 years. 73 years later, in the spring of 2026, another American president stares at maps of the same country. His fleet patrols the same waters. His advisors whisper the same promises, that this time, with enough force, Iran will finally bend. But something has changed. The leverage is no longer in Washington's hands. And President Donald Trump is about to discover what Kermit Roosevelt never lived to see: that the coup in 1953 did not give America Iran. It gave Iran a 70-year grudge and a blueprint for revenge. To understand why, you have to understand what Roosevelt actually did and why Iran never forgot. In 1951, Iran's democratically elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mosaddegh did something no one thought possible. He nationalized the oil industry. For half a century, the Anglo-Iranian oil company, owned by the British government, had extracted Iranian oil, sold it abroad, and paid Iran a fraction of the profits. Mosaddegh declared it over. The oil belonged to Iran. London was furious. British intelligence tried to crush him through sanctions and failed. Mosaddegh was popular. Time magazine named him Man of the Year. So Winston Churchill flew to Washington with a different pitch. He did not talk about oil, he talked about communism. He warned that Mosaddegh would drift into Moscow's orbit and that America could not allow it. Dwight Eisenhower, newly elected, took the bait. The Central Intelligence Agency called it Operation Ajax. Roosevelt bribed newspaper editors. He paid mobsters to stage riots. He hired fake communists to attack mosques, so Iranian clerics would turn against Mosaddegh. 300 people died in the streets of Tehran. Mosaddegh was arrested. The Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, returned to absolute power. 5 American oil companies walked away with 40% of Iran's reserves. For the next 26 years, the Shah ruled as America's policeman in the Gulf, propped up by weapons sales and a feared secret police trained by the Central Intelligence Agency itself. Iran was, on paper, Washington's greatest friend in the region. Beneath the paper, a generation was memorizing names. Then, in 1979, the bill came due. An elderly cleric named Ruhollah Khomeini, exiled by the Shah years earlier, returned to Tehran to the cheers of millions. The Shah fled. American diplomats were taken hostage in their own embassy for 444 days. The most pro-Western country in the Middle East became, overnight, the most anti-American regime on earth. The coup had finally paid its dividend, and the dividend was revolution. What happened next followed a pattern, and the pattern is the key to understanding today. Every time America tried to crush Iran, Iran grew stronger. When Saddam Hussein invaded Iran in 1980 with Washington's quiet approval, he expected a quick victory. 8 years and 1 million dead later, Iran had not only survived, it had built a network of militias across the region that would outlive Saddam himself. When the United States invaded Iraq in 2003 to topple that same Saddam, it handed Iran a gift. Iraq's Shia majority, long oppressed by Saddam, rose to power. Iran's influence spread west all the way to the Mediterranean. The invasion designed to reshape the Middle East in America's image ended up reshaping it in Iran's. This was not a mistake, it was a pattern. By 2015, the pattern had become too obvious to ignore. President Barack Obama tried something different, a deal. The agreement was called the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, and it was imperfect, but it did something no military operation ever had. It actually limited Iran's nuclear program. Iran agreed to ship out roughly 97% of its enriched uranium. Inspectors flooded its nuclear sites. For the first time in decades, the fire was cooling. Then, in May of 2018, President Donald Trump tore up the agreement, and he called it the worst deal ever negotiated. He reimposed sanctions. He promised that Iran would come crawling back for a better deal. It did not. Instead, Iran restarted its centrifuges. And by 2024, its stockpile of highly enriched uranium had reached levels the country had never before possessed. The nation that once agreed to inspections was now, by most estimates, only weeks away from a bomb. Which brings us to the present war. In February of 2026, the United States and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury. Roughly 200 Israeli jets struck 500 targets across Iran. 1,200 bombs fell in 24 hours. Cyber attacks knocked the country's internet offline for 60 hours. And in the opening minutes, Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei himself was killed at his office in Tehran. It was the most successful decapitation strike in modern history. Every military objective achieved. And then came the countermove that no one in the Pentagon had planned for. Iran did not collapse. It did not surrender. Instead, it closed the Strait of Hormuz. That narrow waterway, 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, carries roughly 20% of the world's oil. 1/5 of all the energy used on planet Earth passes through a channel Iran can reach from its own beaches. For decades, Iran had threatened to close it. For decades, the world had assumed it never would, because closing it would hurt Iran's own economy. But in March of 2026, Iran did something nobody predicted. It did not close the strait to everyone. It closed the strait to America's friends and opened it, selectively, to America's rivals. Chinese tankers sailed through. Russian tankers sailed through. Pakistani, Indian, and Iraqi vessels sailed through. And Iran charged them a toll in Chinese renminbi, not dollars. For the first time since the Second World War, a major oil choke point was being operated outside the dollar system. The price of Brent crude surged past $128 a barrel, the largest monthly increase in the history of the oil market. And every barrel moving through Iranian waters was paying tribute to Tehran in the currency of Washington's greatest competitor. President Trump responded the only way he knew how. He ordered a naval blockade of every Iranian port. Over 100 American aircraft and a dozen warships took up position at the mouth of the Gulf. American voices crackled across the shipping channels. Turn around or prepare to be boarded. But the blockade did not reopen the strait. It sealed it tighter. Gulf oil producers, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, watched their exports drop by more than 10 million barrels a day. Qatari liquefied natural gas, piped through the same strait, stopped flowing. The International Energy Agency called it the largest oil supply disruption in history. And here is where the story becomes impossible to wrap up neatly. Because every step the administration takes to regain leverage makes Iran's leverage stronger. If the United States ends the blockade, Iran keeps charging tolls in Chinese currency. If the blockade continues, America's own allies starve. 99% of drinking water in Kuwait and Qatar comes from desalination plants that need imported parts. 70% of Gulf food supplies were disrupted in the first 2 weeks alone. The countries America is fighting to protect are being crushed by the protection. Talks have happened in Islamabad, in Muscat, mediated by Pakistan's army chief and Oman's foreign minister. They have all ended the same way. Iran will not surrender its enrichment program. The United States will not lift the blockade without surrender. Vice President Vance flew home from Islamabad in April empty-handed. The ceasefire, signed on April 8th for 2 weeks, is now counting down to nothing. Now, here is the pattern nobody talks about. Every American intervention in Iran from 1953 to today has succeeded tactically and failed strategically. Roosevelt overthrew Mosaddegh and created the revolution. The Shah got his throne and lost his country. George Bush toppled Saddam and handed Iraq to Iran. Donald Trump killed the nuclear deal and watched Iran enrich to weapons grade. The Israeli Air Force killed the supreme leader, and Iran tightened its grip on the oil choke point the entire world depends on. The story the cable news channels tell you is one of strong leaders and weak ones, good presidents and bad ones. But if you zoom out far enough, you see something else. You see a structural trap. Iran does not need to defeat America on the battlefield. It only needs to survive, because every day it survives, the cost of American involvement goes up. Oil prices climb, allies peel away. The dollar's grip on the Middle East loosens, one tanker at a time. This is why President Trump cannot win. Not because he is weaker than his predecessors, but because the game he is playing was designed more than 70 years ago by men who assumed America would always hold the hammer. They did not imagine a world where China would buy more Persian Gulf oil than the United States. They did not imagine a regime in Tehran that had spent 47 years learning exactly how to bleed a superpower. They did not imagine that the most valuable currency at the Strait of Hormuz would one day be printed in Beijing. Even a perfect military victory cannot solve this. If Trump bombs Iran into total submission, Iranian mines remain in the Strait for years. If he occupies the coastline, the insurgency will be funded by every rival of the United States on Earth. If he walks away, Iran claims victory, and every American enemy from Caracas to Pyongyang takes notes. And if he signs a deal that leaves Iran's centrifuges spinning, which is the only deal Iran will accept, then Iran becomes a nuclear power on his watch, exactly what 4 decades of American policy was designed to prevent. So where does this end? There are essentially 3 futures. In the first, Trump accepts a humiliating compromise. Iran keeps enrichment, the Strait reopens slowly, oil prices come down, and the world moves on. In that future, America remains the most powerful military on Earth, but the myth of American unipolar dominance quietly dies in the waters of the Persian Gulf. In the second, the ceasefire collapses. The war restarts, the blockade tightens. Oil surges past $150 a barrel. A global recession begins. The Gulf Cooperation Council economic model, 50 years of wealth built on the assumption of peace, collapses. Iran, battered but unbroken, emerges with deeper ties to China and Russia than any American strategist thought possible. In the third, something happens inside Iran itself. The regime, weakened by war and sanctions and the death of its leader, falls. But here is the cruel joke of history. The last time a regime in Tehran fell, America cheered and got the Ayatollahs. The time before that, America engineered the fall and got the revolution. There is no reason, none at all, to believe the next regime will be kinder to the United States than the last 2. 73 years ago, an American in a basement in Tehran counted out $1 million and thought he was buying a country. What he actually bought was time. That time has now run out, and somewhere tonight, in a Tehran office that used to belong to a man Israel killed, a new supreme leader named Mojtaba Khamenei is making decisions that will shape the price of the gasoline in your car, the food on your table, and the future of the country you live in. Whatever he decides, The men in Washington do not get a vote.